Welcome to today's video lecture, which is a continuation of Unit 5, our Social Psych unit. Today we're going to focus on Module 4.3e, which is all about what impacts our helping behavior.
So when we look at what impacts our choice to help others, there's a graphic on the right that I really recommend writing down in your notes because I think it's a really good graphic that helps us understand the choices that go on in the head of a bystander. So a bystander is somebody who is an observer of a situation where somebody is needing help, whether that be you are driving down I-90 while somebody's on the side of the road with car troubles. You driving by are the bystander. Or you are in the hallway and you see somebody being bullied and you standing there, you are the bystander. So what goes through the mind of a bystander when they're deciding whether or not they are going to jump in and do something in that situation, whether they're going to call 911 or pull over and help that car on the side of the road, or they're going to stand up for the kid who's getting bullied, or they're going to say something to the person who's bullying them? What impacts their choices? So Darley and Latane are famous for their studies that they have done. They've done numerous studies that we're going to be looking at in class in order to understand the principles of helping behavior. And they've created this graphic that we go through these steps before we decide to help. So first thing we have to do is we have to notice a situation. Okay, so we have to notice that there is a problem. We have to notice somebody's being bullied. We have to notice somebody's on the side of the road. If we don't notice it, well, we're not going to help because we didn't know that there was a problem to begin with. Once we notice it, we have to interpret it as an emergency. Interpret that somebody needs help. There's somebody who is in trouble, or somebody has an issue. If we drive by somebody on the side of the road and we see them on the side of the road, but we interpret and assume that they're just stopping to take a nap, I don't know why we would do that, but let's say you did, you're not going to help because you are not going to see that they need help. So once you notice it, once you interpret it as an emergency, then you have to assume responsibility. And here's the kicker. What they found is that we are more likely to assume responsibility when there are less people around. So the more people, the more bystanders there are around, the less likely we are to help. Now, logically in our minds, we might have believed like, well, that just doesn't make sense. If I were to ask you, is it better to break down on the side of the road on I-90 during rush hour or on an old country road where people, not a ton of people drive down that road? Most of us would say, well, heck, I'd like to have issues on I-90 because there's thousands of people that are going to be driving by that could help me. But in reality, what research shows us is that you are more likely to get help faster on an old country road where not a lot of people drive by. Because when somebody does, and they notice the incident, they interpret what's happening to you as an emergency, they are going to look around and realize there's nobody else that they can diffuse responsibility onto. There's nobody else that they can say, oh, they'll call 911, I don't need to, or I'm sure that person has already done it. They will be more likely to assume responsibility. Once you assume responsibility, that's when you jump in and intend to help. And so a lot of what, one of the reasons that I teach this, not only because it's a part of your curriculum, but for us to realize and recognize the behavior of bystanders and recognize that when we're in a situation, we need to assume that responsibility. We need to not just pawn it off on somebody else and assume somebody else is going to take care of it, but rather we need to imagine that we are the only one in this situation that's able to help. What are some other things that tie into whether or not we decide to help? There's something called the social responsibility norm. And the social responsibility norm says that we feel a sense of responsibility to help those who have helped us or those who we see as needing help. So children, those who are disabled, the elderly, we kind of have a norm in our society that these are individuals that can't help themselves. Animals can't help themselves. Children can't help themselves. Oftentimes, individuals look at the elderly or those that are handicapped as individuals who aren't able to help themselves in all situations. And so we have this norm in our society that you help those individuals. And so those that fall in that category tend to be more likely to get help. There's also something called the reciprocity norm, and the reciprocity norm says that we tend to help others who help us. So if you scratch my back, I'm going to scratch your back. And this extends not just to somebody who has helped you, but we even have like this reciprocity with those who we see as similar to us. So those of the same race as us, we feel a reciprocity to, because we see that those who are similar to us, those types of people have helped us, so we feel a responsibility to reciprocate that to those individuals. So it does work, yes. If your neighbor helps you, you're more likely to help your neighbor. Same thing with a friend, but it also happens within our ethnic and racial and cultural groups. There's also something called the social exchange theory, where we are constantly trying to give the least and gain the most. So when we're deciding to help, it's all about a social exchange. How much time, effort, money, energy is me helping going to cost? And in turn, what are the benefits I'm going to gain from this? Is the good feeling I'm going to get from helping in this situation outweigh the potential negatives that's going to come out of the money lost or the time lost? Think about like giving blood. You know, we run through our head, okay, is the pain of giving blood, the time, the perhaps, you know, feeling a little dizzy afterwards, is that worth the gain that you might have of feeling good about yourself? Or oftentimes, like CVS does a free $20, you know, you get a $20 gift card if you give blood, or you get, I know Oberweis at one time gave a pint of ice cream if you gave blood. And so when we decide to help, we look at it as a social exchange. What am I going to have to give? And in turn, what am I going to receive? And if I receive more than I have to give in order to help, well, by golly, I'm going to increase my likelihood that I'm going to help. Something that's just kind of a side note, I found this interesting as I was reading about a research study that they did, that they found that helping others actually increases somebody's happiness. So in this study, what they did is they gave individuals an envelope of money, and they randomly assigned them to two groups. One of the groups was instructed to spend the money on themselves, and the other group was instructed to spend the money on others, doing something for somebody else, buying something for somebody else. And when they measured happiness, they found that those that were randomly assigned to the group that had to spend money on other people actually were happier than those who spent that money on themselves. So I just thought that was an interesting, interesting side note, that if maybe you're having a bad day or you're not feeling happy, what could it hurt you to try helping somebody else? You know, buy a coffee for somebody else when you're in line at Starbucks, you know, help somebody pick up something that they dropped in the hallway when you normally would just keep walking by, or take that time to go through somebody's math homework with them when they're struggling. You might be surprised that those little bits of helping actually make you happier, much happier than getting things selfishly for yourself. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting study. So one of the questions that social psychologists ask themselves is, are there people who just help to help? Like, are there some people who, regardless of the above reasons, regardless of the Darley and Latane kind of helping triad, or the social exchange or reciprocity norm or social responsibility, are there some people that just help unselfishly? And there's kind of some debate as to whether or not it's even possible for us to help without getting a reward. You know, a good feeling is a reward. Is it possible to truly help somebody without receiving anything? Because a good feeling is a reward. So there's kind of some debate on that, but what they call individuals who help just to help, who have unselfish regard for the welfare of others, are individuals who are called altruistic individuals, who tend to put their lives in danger for the help of others, for no known reciprocity, no known gain that they're going to get. So there is some debate. Is it possible that somebody could truly be altruistic? Is it possible that somebody could truly have an unselfish regard for the welfare and taking care of others? Is it possible that somebody could do that? Not sure. There's some debate on that, but If it does exist, it's called altruism. So what else prevents us from helping? How do our self-interests impact helping behavior? How does our own selfish desire, our innate desire to be better, more successful, stronger than our peers or than those around us impact us? So there's something called the social trap. And social trap is when individuals tend to pursue their self-interests rather than the interests of the whole. And when given the choice to look out for themselves or look out for themselves and a whole group, social psychologists have found that we tend to be selfish. We tend to fall into this social trap and look out for just ourselves. So what you see on the right, this is the prisoner's dilemma. You might have heard of it being called, where you look, there's player A and there's player B, or we can call it criminal A and criminal B. And they put criminal A and criminal B in different rooms. And they ask them, well, you either can say that you had nothing to do with it, and if your partner or the other person in the crime says that you both did nothing, then you both will have 1 year in jail. So you cooperate, say you did it, he says or she says she did it, you both either cooperate, you each get 1 year in jail. However, if person A cooperates and says, yes, I did do it, and player B says, no, I'm innocent, I wasn't a part of that, well, then player A is going to be in jail for 10 years, while player B is going to get off scot-free. Again, there's no communication between these two individuals. They're put in separate rooms having to decide, am I going to confess to the crime or am I going to remain innocent? Another option is then player A says, no, I didn't do anything, and player B cooperates and says, yes, we did partake in this. Well, then player A gets off scot-free, and player B, they are in jail for 10 years. Or they both can try and throw each other under the bus and say, I was innocent, and the other person says they were innocent, and they both point fingers at each other, and they both end up with 5 years in jail. So what happens when people are faced with this question? What happens when people are faced with the question of either taking care of their self-interests or looking out for the interests of a whole? Looking at this matrix, the best case scenario is that you both cooperate and you both get 1 year. But what they find is that instead, people have selfishness, that they tend to pursue their own self-interest, and it ends up with one of the other three options, where somebody gets off scot-free and somebody has the negative piece. And so, we all tend to fall victim to looking out for our own self-interests. The last question we ask ourselves is it possible to force somebody to help? Besides asking them to help, is it possible to force groups to help one another, especially when we look at an in-group and an out-group, or two groups that do not get along and are on two totally different, sides? Is it possible to force them to help each other? And the answer to that is yes, if we use something called superordinate goals. So when you find that you have two groups of individuals who don't get along, the best bet to get them to help each other is to give them a goal that they can only accomplish together. And if they don't work together, they won't succeed. When you do this, this is your best chance to get two groups to not only help each other, but to understand each other and to build a relationship with one another. So looking at this picture, you've got the red and the green people. Well, in order to make a bridge, they have to work together. It's not possible to build that bridge without them working together. The building of the bridge is a superordinate goal. This is a goal that's not accomplishable unless you all work together. And giving people this goal brings teams, brings people who are against each other together. Why do you think that when you're, in your sport, if you might be struggling, your team might be splitting into two and you guys kind of are against each other, and your coach comes out and does a team builder? Well, that team builder is oftentimes based on superordinate goals, where they give you some sort of task that you can only accomplish if you all work together, in hopes that if you all have this shared common goal, common focus, that's going to bring your groups together. So there is hope to get people to help somebody who they might absolutely despise and end up actually coming together as a group. Well, my friends, that is it. Congratulations for finishing your very last video lecture. We'll see you in class.